Hey guys. Well, we have a big question before us, and that question is, will Donald Trump be elected as President of the United States in the 2020 election? Now, I want to give a little bit of context to this because there's a lot of people who have a lot of different impressions and prophecies and videos about this topic, and prophecies come in different forms. Some of them are, I heard the Lord say, and some of them are being declared over the news media and, coming out of people's mouths all the time. So these are the times to be discerning and to really try to do our best to listen to what the Lord is saying and to just make sure that we are properly aligned and that we are on the side of whatever it is that God's will is, that outcome that is going to be positive, the most positive for everyone. That's what we all want, correct? So that's what I mean when I'm referring to God's will. I'm not talking about just some arbitrary, there's just some being in the sky just dictating what we should do. I really mean that there is a foundation of reality that everything springs forth from, and that foundation of reality is fundamentally built out of love, and love looks like something. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we promote love in this season when there's so many questions and so many things that are just happening that are confusing, and there's all the worries about misinformation, and people are worried about different sources of misinformation, and people are very strongly relying upon authority figures right now. And so I just want to, instead of completely just trying to be your authority and answering questions directly, speaking on behalf of God, I want to just offer some of my thoughts as well as prophetic snippets that I feel like I've been collecting along the way. Specifically, I have had 2 dreams pertaining to the 2020 presidential election, and right after President Trump was announced as the winner of the 2016 election, my son had a dream, a prophetic dream, that I believe is also relevant to sort of like the big picture of everything. And you have to understand, we don't have a TV in our house. We aren't watching anything. Like my son didn't even, he hardly even knew like how to describe the person that he saw in his dream. So this is just not, this is not something that we're spending a lot of time focusing on in our house. So I present that to you in the hopes that you won't take it that I am coming at this with a very strong bias that's politically motivated, or that's motivated by any media outlets or other things like that. I am merely going to report to you some of these impressions that I've gotten, and then you can discern and interpret those according to your best instincts and your own conversations with the Lord. So with that, I want to go ahead and I'll start with telling you the dream that my son had. And I will tell you the date of that dream. The date of that dream was November 11th, 2016. 11/11. Interesting. So on November 11th, 2016, my son told me that he had a dream. And so here's the dream. Okay. He dreamed that he was finding a lot of very interesting rare coins. Some of them were gold in color, and he asked his grandpa whether they were special, like $1 coins. But Grandpa said that they weren't. Probably they were just like tokens or something. Now, Micah had a whole stack of these cool looking coins that he was collecting, and they filled up his hand. So Micah was asking Grandpa all sorts of questions about the coins. And they went into a vehicle that Grandpa was driving. And along the way of wherever they were driving, my son loses all of the coins all over the car. Like, he just loses track of them. They like fall out of his hand, or there's a bump in the road or something, and they all like roll away, and they get lost like in the seats and in the, cracks in the side and in the floor, and so basically by the time they arrived at their destination, he had lost all the coins. And but when he got out of the car, he found another very rare and unusual coin that was just outside the car on the ground. And so right as he stepped out of the vehicle, he saw a large golden coin, and it had a very strange sort of a shape. And the way he described it to me was that it had a spiky rim, like a bunch of little spikes, like almost like a sun or something, like how you might draw a sun as a cartoon. And it had two larger spikes that came out of the kind of like one side, almost like maybe in the shape of like cat ears or something, or like horns or something like that. And on the face of the golden coin was our current president, which when I was clarifying what Micah meant by that, he meant Donald Trump. So he had just been elected, a couple days before that. So Micah must have seen that somehow and recognized that in his dream. Now, when Micah was asking his grandpa what kind of a coin this was, his grandpa told him in the dream that this was a $7 coin. So this was a very, very special coin. It wasn't just a $1 coin, because at the beginning of the dream, Micah was looking for $1 coins. He was very interested in that. But at the end, he actually discovered that this was a $7 coin. So, and then my son said that he had a good feeling about the dream as a whole. So that was my son's dream. And I just want to point out a few kind of interesting things, especially now that it's June of 2020, and I'm looking back at this dream for like the first time since 2016. And I'm thinking of all the various things that could have anything to do with anything pertaining to this dream. One was that it seemed like my son was very much interested in collecting coins. And when he was collecting the coins, he was finding not really real authentic coins, but he was finding, they were interesting coins, but they were more like tokens or something. They weren't even really real money. And when he got out of the car on the other side of the journey, he found the coin that was a $7 coin. And the idea is that that was like real money, and it was golden. And so I don't have any expertise at all in the sort of financial realms, but I mean, someone could see if it makes sense at all in terms of fiat currencies, gold-backed currencies. I've heard people talking about how there's some something floating through the air that perhaps somebody on Donald Trump's team is working to get our currency back on a gold standard. So I'm not really sure if that has anything to do with it. Sometimes in dreams, coins or money has to do with favor. So I'm thinking of the number 7, and 7 often represents the divine, or like God's perspective. So perhaps all that this is saying is that Donald Trump has God's favor. So anyway, there's some things there to look at closer and kind of unpack. I don't know, the spikes actually kind of remind me of the coronavirus, So I don't know. I have no idea. I don't really know what exactly is layered into there, but I wanted to just present that dream to you first as sort of like an overarching feeling about Donald Trump being elected as president, because I know that a lot of Christians, especially my husband and I, are kind of well connected into the academics, and a lot of Christians in the world of academia are they were rather disturbed to see Donald Trump be elected as president, and they are very much against him being president. And they've been that way rather consistently throughout the presidency. So I wanted to just give that dream as a preface to just kind of give the general orientation of the background feeling that I've been getting prophetically, which is that I do believe that there is some purpose that God has in appointing Donald Trump as president, and so I feel like he does have God's favor, and so I believe that it's actually important to recognize that. And like I said, I leave that up to you. And I will just briefly mention that around 2019 in December, I had a dream where there was a character in my dream who kind of represents evangelical Christians, maybe this sort of, conservative Christian world. And that person was expressing to me that he was very much in favor, that he thought Trump should be impeached. And so in the dream, I actually stood up and began like preaching with conviction to everyone around the area. And I was saying, if you believe beyond the shadow of a doubt that Donald Trump should be impeached, then you are actually brainwashed by the media, and that you are believing someone's narrative about reality, but that narrative is likely far from true. So I guess that to me that reveals perhaps maybe my own internal thoughts just about that whole thing, which are informed by lots of different data points. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and tell you the two dreams that I had specifically about the 2020 election. So the first dream was in January 18th, 2020. And in that dream, I named it Name Not on the Ballot Write-In Candidate. Okay, so let me just explain the dream. So the setting was at night, and I had the impression of people that were gathering at some sort of a big social event. I'm reminded of, like ballot harvesting parties. I'm in California. Ballot harvesting is a thing that some people do. But anyway, usually it's more done by like the Democratic Party. But in this case, my husband and I began to open ballots and began to scan down to like begin to make our choices for who we were going to vote for. On the last page were the presidential candidates. And I noticed that there were several parties listed with candidates representing each party. But in the Republican spot, it was actually blank. Each line was named according to the sponsoring campaign party, and there were kind of a lot of weird names. So one of them had this specific name, Trump Party, on the left, indicating that whatever the Republican candidate was sponsored by the Trump Party. And then there was another party that had as a candidate Trump's the Man, or something a bit weird. But someone in the room was like they leaned over and they were telling me that something about that wasn't really right. It wasn't really a vote for Trump because the person sponsoring that slot was actually not related to the Trump campaign at all. I then had the thought, as I was considering where to put my check mark, that I actually needed to write in Trump's name as a write-in candidate. I told my husband, and he did the same thing. And as we were doing this, there was a big TV showing live election results. And, all of this is sort of telescoped because obviously we wouldn't be, writing in our candidates at the nighttime while we're watching the election results. So anyway, I'm just saying that's dream language. So as they were revealing the live election results, they were showing the candidates' responses as the votes came in. And they also showed little clips of like the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and, all these things. And then they showed little clips of Donald Trump celebrating, even like in the sort of early stages, because even though his name had been somehow removed from the ballot, the votes were still coming in for him. And in fact, the votes were coming in competitively with the Democratic candidate, and it looked as though Trump was even pulling ahead despite his name not being on the ballot. So anyway, that was the end of that dream. And I feel like there's kind of a lot of layers of that dream that perhaps would be good to ponder or think about. But some things that come to my mind are the attempts to sort of remove Donald Trump from being a candidate in the next election, specifically with the whole impeachment trial and all of these things. And January 18th, that's before there was even any word about the results of the impeachment trial. In fact, it just was initiating like 2 days before that. So there's also maybe an indication of like all of these different parties that were listed that you could vote for that had something to do with Trump, but they were almost like distractions or like, red herrings, if you want to call it that, straw men in a sense. And I wonder if this has to do with some sort of a media campaign to almost like confuse the public about what Trump really stands for, or like who Trump really is, or like who really represents Trump. And like in the dream, like one person had something that looked like it was pro-Trump, but they weren't even really sponsoring or related to Trump. So just kind of a lot of weird things going on in there. But this dream in the end was revealing even a sort of optimistic result for Trump's reelection, even though there was like confusion and he had to be written in as a candidate. So that's interesting data. Now, the second dream that I had was in somewhere around the first week of April, leading up to Easter. And that dream gives perhaps a little bit of a spin on what would happen if Donald Trump is somehow removed and not able to run, or if somehow something happens, in that process. And so let me just tell you the dream. So in the dream, there was a prophet of the Lord, and how I knew he was a prophet, I don't know. I just knew that he was, just in the dream. I just had a knowing. I have no idea who this person is or if he's even a real person in real life. So he was a short, stout American man with dark hair. He looked a little bit Latino, maybe possibly. And he announced, referring to Donald Trump, "This man is no longer God's anointed." So he just turned around and announced that. And then Donald Trump was trying to do everything he could to win the presidential race. And he was running all of his campaigns and raising money and still trying to get votes. But in the end, it was futile. And somehow his name was removed from the ballot at the last minute. And in this one, it was removed from the ballot in the last minute. And so in his place, because the Republicans had to have a candidate, there was, it was a very strange sort of result that in the place of both the Democratic and the Republican candidate, there were the two Clintons. Bill Clinton ran for one party, and Hillary Clinton ran for the other party. So that was kind of strange. And I woke up from that dream immediately after that point. And when I woke up from that dream, I had a very strong impression that I needed to pray for Donald Trump because of a sort of like mounting pressure or an attack that was being formed against him from within the government or from within the structure that's there that he's facing that we'll never really hear about in the public. And I also had the feeling from the symbolism of the Clintons that there was some sort of a plan to steal the election by rigging both sides with a sort of like deep state or cabal supported candidates. And so anyway, I had the impression from that dream that there's some connection between what the prophets of the Lord will declare in this season, or what, and I believe even the prophet of the Lord, in a sense, is representing the entire church, like everyone who is sort of aligned with God right now, that as we stand up and declare and decree like what we want, or like what is the case, that can have an effect on the outcome of the election. And I really do believe that there is some degree of probability that remains. Like, it's not just settled completely in stone, like what is going to happen during the 2020 election. And I believe that God wants to partner with us, and part of the way that he would even make decisions is our contribution. And so this dream, for me, reveals if the church rejects Donald Trump and says Donald Trump is not God's anointed, then what will emerge in the place of that will be two candidates that I believe both candidates will be hostile toward Christians, and in the end, Christians will rather regret their choice. That's my impression. And so I want to actually just refer then again to a final dream that I had about Donald Trump on June 1st, and June 1st, 2020. And I just want to briefly touch on this because I have another video where I explain this dream more in depth. But I just wanted to point out this one part of the dream as perhaps an encouragement to those who have been praying for Donald Trump, for those who are really just trying to understand like what's going on behind the scenes, because it's so difficult, because it seems like the media is spinning everything, and you just, I mean, if you listen to Donald Trump's speech and then you watch the commentary from like the Washington Post or, any sort of mainstream media source, is like the running commentary, and then the commentary afterwards is like completely different than the content of the speech. And I've been noticing this. I haven't watched very many of those things, but it's just kind of bizarre. Like, I didn't realize it could be that off. So anyway, I just want to share the little segment of a dream that I had on June 1st, 2020. And in that dream, that was where everyone was gathering together in the ground level floor of a huge skyscraper. And everyone was gathering together to sort of like watch a movie or something. And Donald Trump entered the room with something like maybe like 4 security guards dressed in black all around him. And the president was waving and acknowledging people who were gathering as he entered. And as he entered, I just felt in my spirit like just this radiation of humility from the president, which might seem very surprising, but in the dream, it was so strong. Like, he was just so humble. Like, and it seemed like this was not something that was maybe like his native disposition, but that it was something that he had learned or that he had pressed through and had acquired. And so I believe that actually could possibly be an indication of an answer to prayer for some segment of the church that's praying for him. And the other feeling that I had was just like, the only thing I can think to call it is a spirit of innocence or like purity. And I had a dream earlier where I was interacting with Donald Trump, and there was a feeling that there were those who were there to entrap him and some other things, and that there was a point where I was interacting with him, and I felt like he maybe was some of the sort of allegations that maybe he kind of would maybe sometimes like take advantage of women physically, kind of was coming through in that dream, like as I was talking with him. And then in the dream, I began quoting a Bible verse to him, like, like, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I'm really grateful for your service in office, and especially despite all the opposition, but you really, you should really pursue biblical purity, and and then I like began quoting some verses out of Matthew or the Beatitudes or something, and it was interesting because in that dream, I think that dream was in like 2019 or something, and I as I shared that, when I mentioned the Bible verses specifically, Donald Trump just kind of like shook his head like, yes, that's good. Yes, that's good. And it was like he was receiving what I was saying, and he, like, even though it was like it didn't feel like the Bible was his native language or something. It was like I could tell that he was like, he had like respect like for the Bible, and then it was like he was like really acknowledging what I was saying and like taking it to heart. So anyway, so this dream that I had June 1st is in a sense maybe even confirming that there have been things, and there have been a lot of Christians surrounding Donald Trump while he's been in office, and so I just hope that there are things behind the scenes that we're not seeing that have really been rubbing off on him in a good way. But anyway, this dream kind of gives a little bit of a confirmation that is the case. Now, in the midst of that dream, on June 1st, 2020, one of the 4 guards that were protecting Donald Trump offered the president a bottle of wine in celebration of the event that everyone was attending. And the president was asking, his trusted security guards, he was asking, do you think this is going to be a problem? Will this cause any difficulties? And so the guards assured him that it would not be a problem. And so then he had just like a little shot glass, and he just had a little bit. But after he had just a little bit to drink, then he became very, very drunk. And he was so drunk that he could not keep his balance. He didn't ever make any inappropriate comments or anything. He didn't say anything. But he was just like very physically inebriated. Okay, so 2 of the guards came alongside to hold him up, and there was a feeling that the guards were kind of trying to lead him off to the side to keep from drawing attention to him in his sort of vulnerable state. But there was also the feeling that maybe this had been a setup all along, and that actually they were trying to make a big display of this event while there were so many people gathering like in the same room. And so it was a little bit of that like back and forth, like it had the appearance of something, but then it was like, all right, is that really what's happening, or is there something else happening here? And so I feel like that dream, I feel like when I had that dream, I felt like, well, there's 2 possible interpretations. And I really think that it's not just that there's 2 possible interpretations. I think that actually there's like 2 open possibilities of things that can happen like at any moment, which are that one, Donald Trump could be set up to look rather foolish in front of a lot of people. And then, so later in this dream, what happens is the skyscraper ends up cracking all along its structure. And at the same time that this is happening, some people representing the masses are saying, oh, it looks like something terrible is about to happen. Time to take a selfie. And then, so like no one's really understanding like the severe nature of the fracturing that's going on of the structure that they're in. And then at the same time, Bill Gates is leaving the building and makes some sort of a public appearance and has some sort of a camaraderie relationship with the media, along with some other people who are perhaps of unknown identity up front, but that are perceived to be participating in something that is heroic from the public's perspective. So that's kind of, if you kind of follow that dream and that narrative, then what that would imply is that there are people who are intending to set Donald Trump up to look very bad and foolish, and then sort of at the right time, like you kind of fracture society and have, some prominent figures come out to the forefront with this sort of like, oh, like everything's wonderful and look at me, like I am so great, and like everything is like positive if you follow after me. And so that's kind of like one thing that, I don't know, lots of people kind of get off on what I might consider more like the spirit of conspiracy theory. And what I mean by the spirit of conspiracy theory is that there's more of a pleasure or like almost like a twisted pleasure in like delighting in the sort of thrill of something horrible is about to happen, or some evil plot is here that, we have to like figure out. And it's almost like, if you like watching a murder mystery or something, it's like, well, it's something very horrible, but there's almost like something pleasurable about like feeling like you're on the inside and like figuring out what that horrible thing is or something. And so I really want to make sure that I'm not telling you to go off and start believing this sort of the spirit behind what people might call conspiracy theory. But I do believe that it would be rather unwise at this point to just believe that everything that you're seeing and hearing people say these days over the public airwaves is 100% completely trustworthy, because I believe there's lots of counter evidence to that. So anyway, that's kind of one thing that I'm just a little bit like, okay, like I want to just give a little bit of a warning that if it looks like Donald Trump is being set up to look really foolish and it's very like over dramatized and like out of proportion, like just be aware that I dreamed about that sort of a sequence. Just be aware that it might not be what it appears, but it might just be staged in some sense. But I do believe that there is another possibility that is close by, that is within reach. And I believe that this is maybe a way of like flipping the meaning of things, which is that what if we say, hey, you know what, like there are people who want to set up and entrap and humiliate Donald Trump, but we as the church, we come into agreement and we say like Donald Trump will be filled up with the Holy Spirit, and that he will just have a new boldness and power to stand up to the things that he's facing, and that he will really be used for the purposes that God has him in office to do. And I do believe that that is a real option of something that can happen. But I do believe then, in conclusion, that it really is up to God's people what will happen, because God does make decisions. He can make decisions without anybody. He's God. He doesn't have to be told what to do. But there's another sense in which he's very dependent on what we want and what we say. And there's a lot of cooperation that goes on between the people of God and God himself. And so I want to encourage you to look into it, consider it, and ask the Lord what he thinks about Donald Trump and the election, and what the best course for our country is. And I hope that all of this data, I realize is getting kind of long, I hope that all of this data that I've been picking up will maybe help to give you at least one person's perspective prophetically of what's going on, so that you can be more informed and maybe even just keep your eyes on the lookout for certain things and see if any of it makes sense to you. So anyway, I just wanted to share that with you guys, and then I want to encourage you actually to really consider praying for our president and not being one of the destructive voices in society calling for, presidents to be pulled down and just prayerfully consider what I've said. And I hope that this will help you to have a little bit of clarity surrounding whether Donald Trump will be elected in 2020 and what you can do about it. All right. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.